A glass of fresh milk feels simple, but it comes with a clock attached. Leave it out on the counter and the change begins quickly. Put it in the refrigerator and you slow that clock down, but only for a while. Milk is rich, useful, and nourishing, but it is also one of the more fragile foods in the kitchen. Now look at a can of milk powder sitting quietly on a shelf. It does not need a cold fridge. It does not spoil in a few days. It can wait for months, sometimes much longer. Then one day, you add water, stir, and something that looked like dry dust begins to act like milk again. That is a strange transformation when you really think about it. How does a liquid food become a powder? How can something so perishable become so stable? And when the water disappears, what is actually left behind? The answer is not magic. It is one of the quieter victories of food science. Let's get into it right here on Secrets of Simple Things. Milk without its weakest part. The simplest way to understand milk powder is this. It is milk after most of its water has been removed. That sounds almost too obvious, but water is the main reason milk is so difficult to preserve. Fresh milk is mostly water, roughly 87%. The rest is the part we think of as the substance of milk: proteins, fats, lactose, minerals, and vitamins. When producers turn milk into powder, they are not trying to replace milk with something fake. They are trying to keep the useful parts and remove the part that causes the biggest problems. Water gives bacteria a place to grow. Water makes milk heavy. Water forces milk to depend on refrigeration. Water is the reason fresh milk has to move quickly from farm to factory, from shop to fridge, and from fridge to glass. Take that water away carefully, and the milk changes form. It becomes lighter, drier, smaller, and far easier to store. What remains is a pale powder with a mild sweetness and almost all the important solids that were in the original milk. So the mystery is not really whether milk powder is milk. The real question is how humans learned to remove the water without destroying the milk itself. A very old answer to a very practical problem. Drying milk is not a modern idea. Long before food factories, people were already trying to solve the same basic problem. How do you carry milk when fresh milk cannot survive the trip? One famous early description comes from Marco Polo in the 13th century. He wrote about Mongolian soldiers who carried a dried form of milk during long journeys. They boiled milk down until it became thick, dried it in the sun, and packed it for travel. Later, they could mix it with water and drink it. That was not the smooth, instant powder people know today. It was rough, simple, and probably inconsistent. But the idea was already there. Remove the moisture. Keep the nutrition. Make the food portable. For a long time, that idea remained useful, but limited. Then, in the 19th century, the problem became much larger. Cities were expanding. Armies needed supplies. Trade routes were growing longer. Fresh milk, however, was still heavy, delicate, and quick to spoil. By the mid-1800s, inventors began finding more practical ways to produce dried milk on an industrial scale. Over time, the key method became spray drying, a process developed and improved from the late 19th century into the early 20th century. By World War I, milk powder had become more than a clever food experiment. It became a military supply tool. Armies needed nutrition that could travel long distances, survive without refrigeration, and still be useful when it arrived. Fresh milk could not do that. Milk powder could. After the wars, the same qualities made it useful in civilian life. It entered bakeries, chocolate factories, infant formula, instant drinks, and household cupboards. It was no longer just a way to survive a long journey. It became a standard ingredient in modern food production. The technology had changed. The machines had changed. The scale had changed enormously. But the basic logic stayed the same as it had been centuries earlier. If water is the problem, remove the water. The factory version of a simple idea, modern milk powder production begins long before the milk becomes powder. First, the milk is tested. A processing plant checks each batch for quality, bacteria, fat levels, and purity. This step matters because powder can only be as reliable as the milk that goes into it. If the raw milk is not good enough, the process cannot fix that later. After testing comes pasteurization. The milk is heated, commonly to about 72 degrees Celsius for around 15 seconds, then cooled quickly. The purpose is to kill harmful microbes while avoiding major changes to taste and nutrition. Milk is sensitive, so the balance matters. Too little heat leaves risk behind. Too much heat can damage the quality producers are trying to protect. Next, the milk is concentrated. It enters an evaporation system where a large portion of its water is removed. At this stage, the milk stops looking like ordinary milk. It becomes thicker, denser, and heavier, more like a concentrated dairy liquid. Then comes the step that gives modern milk powder its form: spray drying. The thickened milk is pushed through tiny nozzles at high pressure, breaking it into an extremely fine mist. That mist enters a tall drying chamber filled with very hot air, often around 220 degrees Celsius. Because each droplet is so small, the remaining moisture evaporates almost immediately. In only seconds, liquid droplets become dry particles. They fall through the chamber and collect as powder at the bottom. The numbers show how concentrated the process really is. It usually takes about 9 to 10 parts of liquid milk to produce 1 part of milk powder. So 1 kilogram of powder may begin as nearly 10 kilograms of fresh milk. For instant milk powder, manufacturers may add a small amount of soy lecithin. Its job is not to fake the milk. It helps the dry powder mix with water more smoothly so it does not clump, float, or resist dissolving. The whole process is built around one idea repeated with precision. Remove water fast enough to preserve the milk but carefully enough to keep the milk recognizable. Why powdered milk isn't imitation milk? Milk powder often suffers from a reputation problem. Some people hear the word powder and immediately imagine something cheaper, weaker, or artificial, but that is not really what it is. Milk powder is not made by inventing a milk-flavored substitute. It is made by concentrating real milk. The proteins remain, the fats remain, the calcium, minerals, lactose, and much of the vitamin content remain. The biggest thing missing is water. That means when the correct amount of water is added back, the result is much closer to milk than many people assume. It may not taste exactly like fresh milk from the fridge because heat treatment and drying can slightly change flavor, but nutritionally, it is not just a weak imitation. The reason it sometimes feels inferior has more to do with context than with what it contains. In places where fresh milk is cheap, cold, and easy to buy, milk powder can feel like an emergency option. It seems like something you use only when fresh milk is unavailable, but in many parts of the world, that is not how people see it. Milk powder is practical. It travels, it stores, it gives access to dairy nutrition where fresh milk would be too expensive, too unstable, or too difficult to distribute. In some industries, powder is not a second choice at all. It is the better tool. Chocolate makers use it because liquid milk brings too much water into a process that depends on careful control. Bakers use it because it adds dairy flavor and browning without changing dough moisture too much. Infant formula depends on powder because nutrition needs to be measured precisely and kept stable. Milk powder is not fake milk. It is milk redesigned for time, distance, and control. The ingredient most people never notice. Milk powder hides in more foods than most people realize. It is in many milk chocolate bars where it blends with cocoa, sugar, and fat more predictably than liquid milk could. It appears in breads, cakes, biscuits, and bakery mixes, helping with texture, flavor, and browning. It can be found in instant noodles, soups, sauces, ice cream bases, coffee mixes, protein products, and powdered drinks. In infant formula, it plays an even bigger role. There, milk powder is not just something added for flavor. It helps form the foundation of a product that must be nutritionally consistent, shelf-stable, and safe to distribute. Its value becomes even clearer in emergencies. When roads are damaged, electricity fails, or refrigeration is unavailable, fresh milk becomes difficult or impossible to move safely. Milk powder can reach places fresh milk cannot. It is lighter, more concentrated, and far less dependent on cold storage. That is why major aid organizations, including UNICEF and the World Food Program, have used milk powder in nutrition programs. In situations where dairy nutrition would otherwise be hard to deliver, powder can become the practical answer. Today, the world produces around 11 million tons of milk powder each year. Large consumers include China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Mexico, where demand for dairy often extends beyond what local fresh milk systems can reliably supply. So that quiet tin in a cupboard is not just a backup for when fresh milk runs out. It is part of a global system that helps milk travel farther than milk naturally should. A fragile food made patient. So how does milk turn into powder? The answer begins with the one ingredient that makes milk vulnerable: water. Water lets bacteria grow. Water makes milk heavy. Water makes transport expensive. Water gives fresh milk a short deadline. Remove it, and milk becomes something else without losing its core. It becomes compact. It becomes light. It becomes stable. It becomes patient. And then, when water returns, the powder can become milk again. That is the cleverness of milk powder. It does not defeat nature by adding something mysterious. It works by understanding what makes milk fragile and carefully taking that part away. Fresh milk is milk tied to time. Milk powder is milk given a longer journey. It is not a lesser version of milk. It is one of the ways humans learn to protect a fragile food, carry it across distance, store it through uncertainty, and bring it back when needed. If this made you look differently at a tin of milk powder on the shelf, tell us what everyday product you want Secrets of Simple Things to explore next. And if you enjoy discovering the hidden science behind ordinary things, subscribe. The smallest details often hold the biggest stories.